when it comes to hostile countries like Turkey. They may at times pretend to be friends, but like Pakistan, they end up stabbing you in the back. Remember, just last year, more than 330,000 Indian tourists visited Turkey. This was against 230,000 in 2022. Now, year on year, there's actually a 20% increase in the number of Indian tourists and those who spend big money. They pay big dollars in five-star hotels in Turkey. They travel well in Turkey. How does Turkey pay us back? By contributing to Pakistan with their drones and their drone operators. But now, Indians are saying enough is enough. They don't want to buy stuff that's made in Turkey. Small but significant steps being taken. Now, joining me on this India First special broadcast is Air Marshal Anil Chopra, former Director General of Center for Air Power Studies. Professor Brahma Chilani is former advisor to India's National Security Council. And Dr. Vaila Wad is a political analyst and senior international affairs correspondent. Air Marshal, I want to begin by asking you, sir, Turkish drones bleeding India is just one part of the story. What's even worse is Turkish operators were handling those drones during Operation Sindoor, and that takes Turkey's deceit altogether to a different level, doesn't it, sir?
Yeah, Gaurav, before I speak about the Turkish drones, I want to just quickly add one point about BrahMos. I think it's the best weapon that we have in our military inventory for surface attack and even anti-shipping weapon. Why? Because you rightly mentioned that it is supersonic, it's high speed, it's very accurate, we have in large numbers, it's made in India. So all the things are in its favor. I'm so happy to read that such a large number of missiles have been used for this operation. Now, quickly, I will make a few points about Turkey. You know, Turkey took Pakistan under its wing, under an Islamic country, right in the 1950s. They joined CENTO together, and they openly supported Pakistan in Kashmir. And never, all the time, they were supporting Pakistan. And of course, their military relationship dates back to many years. You know, F-16 upgrade was done by the Turkey for getting the F-16 to 52 plus standard. And after that, UAVs, UCAV, you have already covered the details, so I will not repeat this. The Mishak trainer of the Pakistani forces flying with them. They've given to Pakistan 4 naval ships. There are, large number of officers who are training between each other. I must also mention that in their 5th generation aircraft, the Khan, there are about 200 Pakistani technicians and engineers who are sitting with them. They're working together. So there is a lot of activity taking place. And of course, I must also mention that Pak mercenaries were used by Turkey in Syria, large numbers, nearly 1,500 of them. So see the kind of course, the most recent one being a large number of drones have been physically flown and also brought by ship. The Pakistanis went to the Turks immediately after Pahalgam happened because they knew that the Indians will hit them hard, and they brought, and you know, we all seen that Turkish aircraft C-130 has been coming, and they've often used, PIA, codes to deliver in, and that is one of the reasons why we also wanted to hit Noor Khan Air Base, because that's where a lot of these things were being unloaded. So you see that relationship between these two countries has been large. Military aviation is an area where they work together.
Imagine if they're so close, why should Turkey have the kind of access it does in our country, sir? Professor Chilani, isn't this mind-boggling? Turkey that's so openly hostile to India, handling cargo and ground operations at 9 airports, including Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai?
Well, it's time for India now to review all these arrangements and Turkish investments in India, such as Turkey's hostility, as Air Marshal Chopra pointed out, that this hostility is a long-standing hostility towards India. The Indian embassy in Ankara, the Turkish capital, the road in front of it was renamed years ago by the Turkish government as Jinnah Road. So the Indian embassy in Ankara is located on Jinnah Road. That is the extent to which they have been insulting India over the years, but we haven't, we paid them in the same coin. It's high time that we really now employ diplomatic, economic, and strategic leverage against Turkey. We need to engage with Turkey's opponents in the region, countries that are
Yeah.
critical of the
Greece,
Turkish president's.
Cyprus.
The Turkish president has been pursuing new Ottoman policies. And most importantly, we need to employ economic measures, review trade relations with Turkey, impose tariffs on specific Turkish goods. We don't employ tariffs as a weapon the way Trump has been doing,
Yes.
against all countries. But we have shied away from employing tariffs even against China, despite what China has done to India. And I think that Turkey is a test case whether India is willing to inflict tangible costs. And in fact, what India should be doing is highlighting how Turkey is aiding and abetting Pakistan's terrorism. This means raising the issue at the UN and also working with the FATF to ensure
Yes.
that Turkey is fulfilling its obligations to combat terror financing. And we can also discreetly support Kurdish groups. After all, they are supporting Kashmiri groups.
Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed so openly when they support the Pakistani regime. Sir, stay with me. I want to bring in Dr. Wael Awad because Professor Chilani raised a very valid point that President Erdogan sees himself as some new Khalifa, some new Caliph, it seems, Dr. Awad. Is that his desire to be seen as the new Caliph of Turkey, leading the new Ottoman Empire, leading the Ummah? And that is why it's choosing Pakistan against India. Is that your appreciation also?
Well, I have been saying it for years, ever since the Baghdadi appeared on the sense of the Daesh and the ISIS. I said the de facto Khalifa is Erdogan. So I have never changed my position on Erdogan's ambition to expand its Islamic influence from Mauritania to Jiangping to Uyghur in China. So therefore, he has been working on since 2011, where he started with the Arab Spring, where most of the Arab countries' governments have been toppled because of his involvement, especially joining hand with the Muslim Brotherhood organization, who hijacked the aspiration of the people of the region who wanted to looking for aspiring for democracy. So Turkey has played the card of the Islamist movement to take a lead, Turkey, in the world. And Syria is the best example to see that the conflict in Syria currently is between Israel and Turkey, who can grab more land, rather than it has been between Iran and Israel 4 years ago before the toppling of Assad regime. But having said that, I would say that also you should take in consideration that there is a strategic partnership between Pakistan and Turkey. And there are two issues which you must understand also here. Is one, that in the 22nd of April, when the Mohammed Shahbaz Sharif went to meet with the President Erdogan, he signed with him a 22 MOU and agreement. And 3 of them were actually on the military basis. And they are having joint ventures in many of the military projects. And Pakistan is taking full advantage of Turkey being a NATO member, Turkey having the sophisticated arms, which they have used it in this war. These are the issues. So nothing new in this, except that the Pakistan also discovered oil on the offshore of Pakistani side, where Turkey's companies are moving forward. So you cannot break this relation, neither in the economic front, nor in the religious front, where they are reviving, or the Islamist movement all over. And that's why India has to tighten its belt, because what happened in Bangladesh, what happened in Pakistan, what's happening in Afghanistan and CIS country is all a worrisome for India as well.
Oh, it indeed is. And once they start fishing in troubled waters in India's neighborhood, Professor Chilani, before I bring in Air Marshal Chopra, this Arab Spring, and I was covering it in Cairo, and I saw the violence, the rampage that followed there. The situation kept deteriorating. And even there, in hushed tones, there was talk about Erdogan messing around. But in hushed tones, there's always been a conversation that people like President Erdogan of Turkey Imran Khan of Pakistan and the regime in Malaysia. That time it was Mahathir Mohamad, but even then we were told that they are trying to remove Saudi Arabia as the leader of the Muslim world, and Turkey wants to emerge as the leader of the Muslim world, that Pakistan and Malaysia will back. Why are countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates permitting this when Erdogan is so openly hostile towards them?
Well, there is a rivalry, a split in the Muslim world between Turkey on one side, Saudi Arabia, UAE on the other side. Turkey has good rapport with the Emir of Qatar.
Yes.
So Qatar is on Turkey's side. So there's a clear split in the Islamic world.
And Saudi Arabia and Qatar are virtually at daggers drawn.
Yes, and as you rightly point out that at one time Malaysia was part of this of the Turkish-led clique, but what's interesting is that Pakistan is able to straddle both camps. It's close to both Saudi Arabia as well as to Turkey. That's very interesting because most of the other Muslim countries tend to be either in one camp or the other. But Pakistan very deftly has been able to play both sides and extract concessions from both sides. As you know, it has received bailouts from Saudi Arabia. It's receiving substantial military assistance from Turkey. So clearly, Pakistan has done well by exploiting this rift in the Arab world to its advantage. But I think in terms of what India can do against Turkey, we should not forget that it's not just Turkey. India has allowed the bilateral trade surplus with China to cross India's aggregate defense budget. So that really, in effect, what India is doing is underwriting China's economic and geopolitical power by allowing China to have such a mammoth trade surplus with India. In fact, I don't have the latest figure, but for 2022, that's 3 years ago, India contributed nearly 12% to China's overall trade surplus in the world.
And it's China, Turkey, and Pakistan together that were bleeding us even during Operation Sindoor. Marshal, before I come back to Turkey, and since Professor Chelani has specifically named China, I want to quickly understand from you. In Operation Sindoor, from what India today has been able to pick up from sources, so there were these JF-17 Thunders and the J-10Cs. They're Chinese aircraft. Some built in Pakistan, some built in China. The PL-15 long-range air-to-air missile. There are some reports that seem to indicate, or some information, that it were Chinese operators, whether they were in Pakistan or was the satellite operated or elsewhere. They were guiding these operations. Were they even firing these weapons in your appreciation, sir?
Gaurav, undoubtedly, with 80% of the military hardware with Pakistan coming from China, China has a great role. In most of the systems that have been delivered to them in the last 8-10 years, there are technicians, there are engineers, there are a large number of other support people who are sitting in various air bases and command and control centers. HQ9 has come to them very, very recently. It's just a 2.5-year-old system with them. And similarly, some of the other aircraft like J-10 has just come to them recently. And for next 5-7 years, we expect these people with them. So therefore, now Pakistan does have satellites of their own. They are dependent on ISR and targeting with China for satellites. So therefore, there is a great amount of work and coordination going on because the entire military system of Pakistan is of Chinese origin. And therefore, including surface-to-air missiles, air-to-air missiles, as you mentioned, P-15. So therefore, there is going to be, there must have been, and there would be, and that's what we are reading reports all over the world, that Chinese have been supporting Pakistan. It's very important for China because for the first time, their equipment is in combat. And if their equipment gets shamed, which I think we have reasonably done, their equipment will not sell. As it is, JF-15, who all have 17, who all have bought? Pakistan
Yes.
and Myanmar and Nigeria. Well, yeah, and they're doing badly. They've had cracks on their skin, airframe skin, and the Myanmar is practically grounded them. They're just three with JF with Nigeria, and numbers may not go up. So
Okay.
my contention is the Chinese were very worried, and I think they supported them, including carrying out their air defense operations and also wanting to try and
I want to
intercept
come
them.
back to this China bit in just a moment because, Professor Chilani, I want to bring in Dr. Vail Awad. Chinese equipment proved to be subpar in instances, because if a live PL-15 was recovered, which means the propellant ran out, but the missile didn't hit the target. If the Honky 16 or the HQ-9P, their air defense system was taken down by the Harrops and other systems in India, it just goes on to show if a radar cannot protect itself, how will it protect Lahore city in future? So Chinese equipment, Beijing will be very embarrassed. But I want to come back to Turkey for just a moment, Dr. Awad. Why should a company like Celebi have access to multiple airports, 9 airports in our country? The way they handle cargo, the way they handle movement of passengers, including VVIP passengers, they will have access to all data, all information, and data could really compromise India's security. So somebody in the government here also needs to answer, the way we support Chinese investments and Chinese economy, and the way we are encouraging Turkey's economy. We really need to wake up, Dr. Awad, to Turkey's hostility.
Well, let me just make a small comment, Kawan, before I come back to you on this. Actually, we are underestimating the Chinese power on this region. I think what Pakistan is having is the 4th generation of the Chinese. You see, JP-10 are still, the Chinese having JP-35 and 36, which is a huge sophisticated weapon. And I think that's what worried the United States and the West, that China is surpassing in their technology in many fronts, by the way, many folds. Though I wouldn't comment much on this because I leave it to the army personnel or to an expert to talk on those deals. But Turkey, for example, India has been diversifying its sources of buying arms from all over the world. They have been also using soft power policy in getting India recognized. You see, we know that India for the last 2 decades has been on the uprising and have a reputedly and respectable position globally. So I think that's why India continued that sort of relation with all the nations. Even Turkey approached India, by the way, for having many, cultural exchange, but India was reluctant because they knew the intention of Turkey. But in business and in terms of relation, I think that's the government has to decide who is good and who is bad, and why shall we feed the Chinese when we need the Chinese, or why should we allow the Turkey when we need? So people to people there. My take on this, actually, there is no questions of going for a full-fledged war in South Asia, whether we like it or we don't like it. What we need to see at this point of stage is let us activate a forum or some maybe Shanghai Cooperation in bringing down tranquility. There is no question that there we can see a destruction. You know what will happen for India and Pakistan if this war really went a full-fledged war? The world will be watching, and the global peace and security will be at risk. But I think India is taking diplomatic move internationally to isolate Pakistan. If we concentrate on those issues and bring people to the table to discuss, I think there we can achieve. And India can win, not only militarily, but can win politically, economically, and also globally.
No, I completely agree with you. But then how do you bring somebody to a negotiations table that wants to kill you on that same table? It wants to ask you your religion and then shoot you in your head at point blank range and then probably have a meal at that same table. That's that mindset of Pakistan state-sponsored radical Islamist terror. And trust me, I've covered it for 3 decades. Pakistan won't change, Professor Chilani. I mean,
I just want to tell you what Mr. Jaswant Singh said it once. He said, you can't choose your neighbor. So let's do it that way.
No, I know I can't choose my neighbor, but I can choose to hit him so that he knows not to strike me. And that's very clear, Air Marshal Chopra. The 15 BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles were a message that state sponsor of radical Islamist terror would learn that, yes, we can't change our neighbor, but we can put him in his place.
Yeah, see, this decision was taken at the political level, at the highest political executive level, and we have, we have shown lots of maturity for last 30 years. After 2008 Mumbai attacks, we used diplomacy, and then after Uri, we went into the some strike across the border, LOC, and now then we Balakot, we did a deep strike, and now we have been telling them that we will take it that much and no more. And I think that is what was the aim of this exercise. Immediately after the strike on the terror targets, the militaries had spoken to each other that our aim was to punish terror, not to hit military and civil targets. We didn't want to escalate, but then the other side decided to send drones all across the country, right from Srinagar
Yes.
down to Bhuj and Nalia. So therefore, a large number of 400 odd drones came here. They tried to hit military and civil targets, and they got an appropriate response. So it is, the dynamics in South Asia are going to be like that, and a new normal has been created. Air power will be used. The militaries are still on hot standby. They are, absolutely ready, and we are hoping that no side will take a foolish act. I agree with the Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, that we all need to be mature. Yes, the government has done that. When the proposal for ceasefire came, we did that. But that doesn't mean that we will let the terror carry on, to bleed us for
Okay.
thousands.
The last 30 seconds I have on this part of the show, Professor Chilani, the apprehension is Pakistan has realized militarily it always knew it can never defeat India. Militarily, it had learned that lesson. However, it may still use terror as an instrument of its policy, and this time perhaps through the Bangladesh route, the Nepal route, some other route to bleed us and then say, not us, you dare not target us.
Well, I think India is the only country in the world wedged between two closely aligned nuclear powers, China and Pakistan, both of which lay claim to sizable swaths of Indian territory. And this nexus is imposing significant costs on India, and contrary to the assertion that you cannot change neighbors, the biggest developments in modern world history have been the change of neighbors. How did China become India's neighbor? Not because of geography.
They usurped
because
Tibet.
of annexation, occupying Tibet. The disintegration of the Soviet Union created new neighbors for countries.
Yes.
So the biggest developments in the world in modern history have been the change of neighbors. How did Bangladesh emerge?
Very good point, sir.
By
Very good
changing
point. Perhaps we
geography.
need Sindhu Desh as our neighbor, and we need an independent Baluchistan as a neighbor next to Sindhu Desh, and a separate Pashtunistan. Let's see. I mean, we don't know, Dr. Awad. We don't know what future has in store for this region. I've run out of time, but Professor Chilani makes a very pertinent point, and I leave all our viewers with that thought.